Good morning. How are you?
Oh, just blessed.
But good.
Stop by to hear your story.
Oh, I have one to tell. You know what? I was born here in Decatur, Alabama, and my name is Ethelene Banks. I was born in September, on September the 25th, 1907. And my mother was named Julie Banks Shawty. She was first a Shawty, and then she married Hewlett Banks, Hewlett J. Banks. And we lived in this house, and she was born in this house that we're living in at 1004 Sycamore Street. So, she lived here so long, and when she died in the same room that she was born in. And she never moved. And the house is 174 years old.
This house is 174
Yes,
years.
it is. It's 174 years old. And the deed was applied for in 1830. And by that we knew we have the credentials to show what time we bought it. My first job, though,
But wait, let me ask you something. Tell me about your grandmother.
oh, my grandmother was Irish, and my grandfather was Indian.
So when they moved on this street, this was an all-white area.
This was a white area. Only one person or family was in here that was part black, was with my mother and her husband.
But how did your grandma get this house, though? I mean, they didn't know anything
No,
about
she went and bought it, herself, being an Irish, and they thought she was white, and so they sold it to her. And then when she moved in here, they they couldn't move her out because she'd already paid for the house.
but they had no idea that your grandfather.
They had no idea that it was my grandfather was an Indian. And then the people living in this community didn't move out, so it stayed white for a number of years. And then finally, the blacks started to moving in. Then the whites started moving out.
Well, tell me about your history with the McIntyres.
Well, the McIntyre home was over there, and it's just about 4 years old, but not the 174. It'll be around 104 years old, like that. And I didn't have anyone to play with but her little girl, and she would bring her up here, and we would walk together, go to the river and have fun, and was nobody else up here for me to play with. Then a German moved on the river, and I went down there to play with them. They called this section up here on the hill, and we were good neighbors. They were. We all went together, and we had good times together. And then I went to school. I went to what then was called just a regular public school. It was on McCartney Street. And I stayed there until got in the ninth grade. Then I left in the ninth grade, and I went to Nashville, Tennessee. And I finished my high school at Pearl High in Nashville, Tennessee. And after I came back to Decatur, then I went to Alabama State and stayed there 2 quarters. And then there was the place where I was offered a job. And I wasn't supposed to be getting out of school to do anything, but I didn't let my mama know anything. And I didn't let my father know. And so, you know what? He told me, he said, go and buy your clothes and go get ready to go back to school. And I was afraid to tell him that I had received a job because a lady came through and asked me, did I want a job? And I told her yes. And so then he told me, guess what my father told me? He says, well, you know what? Since you're grown, then you're just on your own, so you get yourself back to school the best you can. But he didn't mean it because he really wanted me to go back to school. So I got the job. And my first job was at Summerville, Alabama. Oh, and you know what? When I got there that morning, it was raining down frogs. And he put me out, in the front of a store. And he left me there. One of the trustees came and he says, well, you stay here in the front of this store until I come back for you. And he stayed so long, finally the owner of the store came out and said, young lady, wouldn't you like to come in here? And I said, oh, yes, please. And I stayed there until he came back for me. But I have to tell you this story. I was what I was called an unwanted teacher. Nobody wanted to keep a teacher at Summerville. He came back for me and he said, well, I'm going to take you to my house and you're going to stay there until we get a place for you to stay. And I got there and met his wife, and she had a child. We sat there until he was waiting for him to come back. Do you know, when he got back, it was 5:30 that afternoon. And he said, well, I found a place for you to stay tonight. And he carried me then to a Mr. and Mrs. Jackson's house. And she said to me, well, come in and have a seat. And I'm going to keep you tonight, but I had decided that we were not going to keep any more teachers. And I went to school the next morning, and I couldn't see the schoolhouse because it wasn't a schoolhouse. It was just a place, where the lodges met. And we couldn't see the house for the grass. So I had to get me a stick and knock the grass down in order for me to get in that schoolhouse. Then when I got in there, the walls was just covered with multiplication tables in all different colors, from white down to green, red, yellow, and everything. So I didn't have any of them there. The trustees still hadn't come. And so finally one came and we decided what we had to do, had to scrub the walls. And I went back to the house then. And the lady wasn't there. She was in the cotton patch. And I walked in the kitchen and I saw some food there. And I said to myself, I'm going to cook this food for her. And I cooked the dinner. And when she came back, she stopped on the porch and she kicked her shoes off. And she said, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have to get up here and cook. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. When she opened the door, it was so hot, she didn't know what had happened in the kitchen. And when she found out that I had cooked her turnip greens, and I had churned the milk, and I had gotten the butter and put it in the bowl where she could wash it, had made the bread, and then I had baked potatoes and a blackberry cobbler. And she said, whew, what is this? And she sat down and she ate the food, and she said, well, I haven't ever had this done to me before.
Well, let me ask you something. How old were you when you learned to cook like that?
I was 18 years old. And let me tell you something else. When I registered the children, there was two boys in there. They hadn't had school there in 5 years. And these two boys was born the same year I was born, but I would not let them know that we were the same age, because they had never gone to school in 5 years, and naturally they were great big girls because they had to work in the cotton patch. But let me tell you, when they came for me, and the man said, well, we have found a place probably she can stay for a while. She said, you're not going to get her because I'm going to keep this one. This is a girl that I need to have in my house. And we got along just like mothers and sisters. And, well, that went on. And then I left Somerville. I worked there for 4 years. And then they called me from Hartselle to come and talk with the superintendent. And then they moved me to Cedar Lake, a Rosenwald school. I stayed there, and of course there We had gardens and everything. We made everything for people to get. And then I had started a little lunchroom there. And then I left there. I was coming home, and the lady that I had boated with came out and said to me, said, "You can stop here because you have a call from Decatur." I went in, and it was Decatur City System calling. And I was supposed to go to them that next day, which was Saturday. And they said, "Well, we would like for you to teach at Carver School." That was in 1945. That's the year that I came here as a teacher. And I worked over to Carver 22 years. And then during the segregation time, desegregation, Carver was closed in 1967. And then I was transferred to the office as, first I went to Riverside, and I was over the teaching of reading. So they made me then the assistant reading teacher because the lady here from Chattanooga was the supervisor of teaching, and her name was Miss Rudisell. Then Miss Rudisell left Decatur because the people thought that I was doing a better job than she was. And then they gave me the supervisor of reading, math, and science. And I stayed there until I retired. And I retired in 1974. But I still left out something. I wanted to do special work. After I finished A&M, I wanted to continue my courses in reading and math. Well, it was not offered in Decatur. I mean, in the state of Alabama, not even at Montevallo. And I decided I would do further study, and our first place I went to was George Peabody College in Nashville, Tennessee. I left there, and then I went to Kentucky State and Virginia, from there to Virginia State. But listen, I was only getting those subjects that I wanted to be prepared in. And then after that, then I left there and went to Tuskegee Institute, then back to Alabama State, and then back to A&M, trying to get everything that I could in those subjects. The McIntyres lived over there for a number of years. In fact, she was a great neighbor. They used that house to see the soldiers when they were coming in to fight and have war. And they notified them from that, when they saw them coming from the bridge, and they were ready to meet them at the bridge. And that's where they ended up with doing their fighting in the Civil War. Oh, one of the richest persons in Decatur was Mr. Tobe Stout. And he lived right across the street there on the corner of Wilson and Sycamore Street. Now, that was not always Wilson Street, that was Pond Street. And this is the only street that remained the same, was Sycamore. But most all of the streets was changed because, see, when the highway came through here, then it was called Wilson Street, and instead of Pond Street. The first black tailor lived down on the corner of Market Street, and his office, his business was on Railroad Street. And he came here and stayed about 9 years, and he did quite a bit of work here as a worker. Mrs. Rainey was that lived up on the corner. She had a florist, and she bought up most of Market Street. On that street, she had a garden as well as a flower garden instead of having just a florist garden. She had it planted out in the open, and she was one of the best florists in Decatur. It was called the Tennessee Florist Company, and it was a woman and her daughter that ran it. Oh, she bought on the church where the spiritual church is now. That was a Methodist church, but they first worshipped in a garage across the street, next door to where Ms. Ball lives. They worshipped over there, and she finally bought this land and built the church that the spiritual church is on now. And they worshiped there for years until so many blacks started to move into this area, and then they sold it to blacks.
Let me ask you about your dad. I want to back up and ask you about your father. What kind of man was he?
He was a humdinger, if I could call him that. That's what they called him, a humdinger. He felt that he was a Democrat too. And at that time, you know, we didn't have any black Democrats. And no, I don't mean Democrat.
Republican.
He was a Republican, yes. And we didn't have any there. So he said that nobody could live under the roof of the house that he was in if they weren't Republicans.
Your dad said that.
Yes, he did. And I said to them, I said, well, you don't know, I'm still voting, but I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican, I'm a Democrat. And he was also another Republican. And he owned a minstrel show. And then he traveled on the road with shows. And he also had those concessions on the fairground. He had Spider Girl, Richard the Big Head Baby, and that boy, Richard the Big Head Baby, lived in Easttown. And they traveled together. He traveled with him until he finally passed.
Now, Easttown, what is Easttown?
That's over there in where the church was that Reverend Carter pastored. That's the part that they called Easttown.
Over past Church Street.
Mm-hmm. Across the highway.
Now, a little bit about your father's background, his people, his parents.
Oh, his parent was Matt Banks, which was the councilman for Decatur
And what race?
in 1864. He was a mulatto. And he was the first councilman. And then after that, you know, it was Mr. Stevenson.
So your father was white.
Yes. My father's father was white. And my grandmother was Irish. And my grandfather was Indian.
And give me a little history on Bank Street, because there are rumors that some kind of way you are affiliated with that name. Isn't it true for that?
Well, that was on my grandfather's side, which was the Banks family. And that was part of that history. And that has never been really discussed. It never really said that it was truly named from him. But that was my grandfather's father.
Did you have no problem with your family, being that your grandfather was white?
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
How did he welcome the family as well as the darker side?
They claimed him as a family. When my grandfather died, every one of them came to their funeral and dressed in black. And I was a child, about 7 years old at that time. But they claimed him every bit. He lived with his father, which was white. And he sent him to school, gave him an education as far as he could go then. But it wasn't in Decatur.
A little bit about your mother.
A very, very quiet person, but she was a good member of King's Memorial Church, and my, she had two other sisters and a brother that lived away from here. And of course, my mother had 7 children, but all of them died, but the two of us, which was Athaline and Patricia. And Patricia died in 1974. I have no kin people anywhere. I'm the only person, and when you see me, you see the end. I was 13 years old when I joined the Methodist Church. My father, Hewlett Banks, was one of the trustees. My grandfather, Matt Banks, was also a trustee, and he was the one that was our councilman in 1864, a city councilor
In Decatur,
in
Alabama.
Decatur, Alabama.
Okay.
He was the first one.
The first black.
Zach.
You know, a lot of people don't know that.
I know they don't, but it's on the books. If they want to learn more about it, they'll find it on the books at the courthouse.
Now, the original church, where was it located? The first.
The original church was over on Market Street, and that was before my time.
Okay.
But then was the old church that we just moved out of was built in 1908.
Who was the pastor then? Do you remember?
No, I really don't remember the pastor then. If you had told me, I think I would have been ready for that.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. But you know, now did your mother and your mother and your father both, were they Methodist?
Mother and father and all of my people were Methodists, and they belonged to this church, the whole family.
So you've been in this church a long
A
time.
long, long time. If I had been the treasurer for 51 years of this church, so you know that has been a long time.
Yes, it is. So you've seen a lot of people come and go.
Yes, but I stayed.
Yes, yes. You know, I noticed that some of the rooms in the back are named after people like the Jones rooms. And so all those people, they're gone. The Jones room, I can remember one of those rooms. And I can't remember some of them, but the Jones room. Did you know the Joneses?
I do. I know all of them. In fact, I taught all of the children. So I definitely know him as Walter Jones' father. Was the room, and that's when they built this church.
Okay.
But the other church, you see, they were still over in East Town as a member of the Reverend Carter's church at the Methodist church there.
So you would say probably your family is the oldest
Members of this church. Yes.
Because there was Jones Chapel, which united with you all.
Yes.
And what year was that?
That was the year after Reverend Ragland came here. It was 2 years after he came, which he came here in 1977. So that means that it was about 1978 that the church was moved here.
Okay. Oh, you know, it's funny. We just really enjoy it. You know, I have the privilege of sharing a pew with you on Sundays, and I brag about that to people because I really find it a blessing to be able to fellowship with you every Sunday, you know, and it's really a blessing to me and my family.
I really don't want to be calling this my seat, but since it's near a window that has the Banks family on it, I feel like I just want to sit by that window.
Oh, well, I feel like you earned this seat. I truly feel like you earned this seat. But it's it's a lot of families that has come and went uh, at this church, the Methodist Church in general. Now, as far as the Carter family, is there any members still here from the Carter family?
Oh, yes. Mrs. Stevenson.
Yeah, that would be what, a
That was
grandchild, great grandchild?
with the Joan, well, I mean, with the church in Easttown.
From the church.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
yes. And yeah, there was Miss Stevenson and her family.
Okay. So you said you served as a treasurer for 51 years.
That's right.
And okay, when you first got that office, who was the president? Do you remember?
Oh, I remember the treasurer was Mr. Perry, James Perry, which was Barbara Bowles, related to Barbara Bowles' uncle.
Okay, and Barbara Ball still goes to this church,
Yes,
right?
she's still here.
Okay, okay. Well, I don't expect you to just remember everybody, but I just wanted to just touch base a little
We
bit.
also had a lady here that was named Miss Mary Jane Mosley, and a circle was named from her. Now, she was here when I got here and before then, and she was a faithful member here for years. That's the reason they had a circle that was named from. And also Carrie Mathis, Carrie Harris Circle. And she and her husband was superintendent and teachers of those Sunday school for around 25 or 30 years.
And like Miss Clotilde Harris, that's her. That related to her, right?
No, it's another
Oh,
Harris,
that's
another Harris.
But just okay now, Miss Clotilde Harris, they come from East Town also,
Yes,
right? Okay. So you're talking about the people that were
but here.
when they got here.
Yes,
Okay. Okay. All right. What about, is there anybody else here besides you that was here when they got here?
When you mean when now Miss Phillips was here, when they came into this church, when the Methodist Church came in, when they came over here. Now Miss Phillips and Miss Tapscott, I just really right now I can't recall all of the members that was here. The one that they mentioned, Miss this morning in the service that was ill.
Okay.
She was here too. And the McDonalds and Mrs. Ruffin, Cornelia Ruffin, and Miss Smith, Nell Smith, were all members here. And they were, the McDonald family was a member here years before. In fact, they were just some of the founders of the church in Murphy.
Well, express some of your, I guess, your feelings towards your church. How do you feel about your church?
Well, I feel like it's just like my home. I just feel like it belongs. I couldn't go to any other church and be satisfied. I'd have to stay here and the people here have been so sweet to me. And in my illness, it's just like a family, knowing that I didn't have any family. They treated me just like I was one of their own. And I didn't want for a thing. And I didn't, even the time was spent. And that's a whole lot that I can never forget.
Well, when I look at you, I see grace. Has God been good to you?
God has been good to me. I have prayed, and honest to goodness, I can feel almost His presence when I'm praying, because I have felt the difference. I have trouble with my eyes, and I ask God, please don't let me go blind. And I can see now, but